All right, thank you. Hello, I am Linda Heisman-Powell, and I serve as the chair of the Behavior Analyst Advisory Committee of the Kansas Behavioral Sciences Regulatory Board. And today is Friday, February 13th, 2026, so it's Friday the 13th. I ask the members of the advisory committee to respond to a roll call to signify their presence at this open meeting that is being held remotely by conference call and other electronic medium. Denise Seisman.
Present.
Allison Bell.
Here.
Alec Bernstein. Holly Kramer.
Present.
Wes Dodson. Kelly Harrison.
Here.
All right. Emily Kessler.
Here.
Pamela Neidert.
Here.
Piqua Lamb Chestnut.
Here.
Stephanie Wiley.
Here.
And we know that Dr. Alice Zhang has let us know she will not be here. I note the following BS.
Linda, but it's Willie.
Willie. Okay. Thank you. I note the following BSRB staff members are also present. David Fye.
Here.
And Leslie Allen.
Here.
All right. Next, David Fye will read a message concerning this meeting being held remotely.
Thank you, Linda. This is David Fye, Executive Director for the Kansas Behavioral Sciences Regulatory Board. Public comment allows the advisory committee individuals to address the advisory committee about concerns, but the Kansas Open Meeting Act, or the KOMA, does not require the advisory committee to provide public comment or answer questions from individuals. Individuals requesting to provide public comment could contact the executive director prior to the meeting by sending an email to david.fye@ks.gov. There will be no public comment at this meeting as no individuals requested time for public comment. Because we are conducting this public meeting remotely, I state for the record the following information. Access to this meeting is being conducted by a medium of interactive communication that allows members of the public without cost to attend the meeting through the use of the conference call or by viewing the board's YouTube channel. While the meeting is conducted remotely, the requirements of the KOMA are not suspended. As such, we will be conducting this meeting pursuant to the KOMA. On January 15th, 2026, we sent notice to all individuals who had requested notice of meetings. We also posted the information on the board's website at ksbsrb.ks.gov. You may obtain a copy of the notice at that website. An agenda and other meeting material have been posted on the board's website and are available for review. You may also request a copy of the agenda specifically by sending an email to david.fye@ks.gov with the subject line request for the agenda, and it will be sent to you. The notice contains information for the conference call and YouTube channel that allows the public to attend the meeting free of charge. The notice also states that if we have any technical issues during the meeting, you may send an email to bsrb@ks.gov. A recording of this meeting will be available on the BSRB YouTube channel following the conclusion of the meeting by using the link to the meeting on the agenda. The conference call line is live. We did check it before we got started. There's no one currently on the line, but if someone connects and introduces themselves, I will let you know.
Thank you, David. So this meeting is now called to order, and the advisory committee will begin its discussion of the first item on the agenda, which is approval of the agenda.
Do you need a motion, Linda, to approve
I do.
the agenda? I motion to approve the agenda.
Thank you. Allison, you are very, very quiet.
Oh. How about now? Can you hear me now?
A little bit better. Yeah. I'm not used to you being so quiet.
I second that motion. That motion. Not a motion.
Thank you. I have a second. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Same sign. Motion carries. We can start with the business. So the next item of business on here is the approval of the minutes from the previous advisory committee that was conducted on December 12th, 2025. I'm sure you all have read those prior to the meeting. So I will entertain a motion to approve.
I move to approve.
Thank you.
I second.
Thank you. That was Denise. All in favor? Aye.
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 All opposed, same sign. Motion carries. We are moving right along, you guys. All right. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to David for an executive report, which will include some legislative updates. Correct, David?
Yes. And thank you, Linda. And I think I'll focus most of my time today on some legislative updates and then just provide a couple of notes from the most recent board meetings. First, starting with some legislative updates, as far as the BSRB is responsible for, there are two main things that happen every legislative session. And in Kansas, that usually is about 90 days, starting at the beginning of the calendar year. How those days are counted differs depending upon which administration is deciding the days, but essentially about 90 days every year is when the legislative session begins. We, as a state agency, are responsible for putting together a budget of proposed expenditures. We estimate revenue as well as how much we will need to spend for operations. And then while we don't receive money from the state, we do ask them to put a limitation in the appropriations bill of how much we can spend of our available funds in any given year. So we did submit a budget on September 15th, earlier last fall. And in traditional years, that is reviewed by the governor's division of the budget. And then that moves forward, and then the governor puts forward the State of the State address. Then the governor's recommendation on the budget is revealed. The House and the Senate use that as a starting point and then move forward with their budget committees and subcommittees, have separate appropriations bills, and then come together before the session ends. Last year, the legislature took a different approach and decided, as opposed to using the governor's recommendation as a starting point, the legislature would put together their own budget bill and would start the budget process a bit earlier than traditional. And so they started having some special committees meet in the fall. This was in the fall of 2024 originally. And then they had the 2025 legislative session where the legislature introduced their own appropriations bill and essentially used that as their starting point. There were still questions, and they still would ask information as far as what the governor recommended on expenditures, but they used their own appropriations bill. This year, they followed a similar approach, and so there were a number of special interim committees that met in the fall that looked at budgetary items. They largely focused on larger agencies, especially ones that receive state general fund money. And so this year, the legislature had sort of put out there that they intended to go very, very fast this session, and even approved some special budget committees to meet the week before session started to start to hear agency budgets. Now, I spent 8 years prior to this role working with the Legislative Research Department at the Capitol, and I can tell you that generally the budget hearings started about the first week in February, perhaps the last week in January. So this pacing is the fastest I have ever seen in terms of the budgetary process. For most of the smaller agencies that didn't have very many changes, like the BSRB, those committees made recommendations on the budget the first week of the legislative session or the second, and then the chairs of those budget committees forwarded the recommendations to the full appropriations committee. So the budget committee for House higher education budget, that's the budget that here's the BSRB budget every year. We presented information to that committee. They made recommendations and basically recommended the same amounts that we had requested. The chair of that committee reported it to House Appropriations, and that committee basically approved what had been submitted by the budget committee with no further adjustments. So on the Senate side, they made a decision that for agencies that didn't have very many changes or were requesting the same amounts approved by last year's legislature, they would not have special budget hearings for those agencies. So we did not have a budget hearing on the Senate side. So this past week, House Appropriations Committee has been working their version of the budget bill. The Senate Ways and Means Committee has been working their version of the budget bill. And House Appropriations is scheduled to finish their work on their bill in committee today. And then the Senate Ways and Means Committee is scheduled to finish their work on Monday of next week. And then ultimately what will happen is the bills will be put together in drafted form, and then they'll be available to be run on the chamber floors. Usually this is not something that happens until much later in the legislative session, but that's where we're at. So we are monitoring that process. As of right now, there's nothing of note for the BSRB budget, but we will continue to answer questions with it as they come up and monitor information. Another topic that is relevant to the BSRB is when those committees meet during the legislative session, they consider bills and informational briefings. And so there are a number of bills that have been introduced this year that are relevant to the mental health professions, and I'll talk about some of those bills. First, I did want to make sure that you all were aware the BSRB did not introduce or request for introduction a bill this year. In the fall, the board was considering several items that they were in favor of moving forward, but the messaging that we were hearing from members of the legislature was concerning. They were basically the message that I had picked up in talking to multiple members was that they planned to move very, very quickly this session. And it was the impression that I received that if something wasn't absolutely necessary to move forward this session, it would be better to introduce it next session. And so we took this to the board. We decided to have the board members discuss this, and ultimately the board decided to go ahead and not request introduction this session, but to continue to work behind the scenes on a number of items and then look to see if legislation potentially could be introduced next year on some of those measures. So that is why there was not a bill introduced by the BSRB this year, but that was something that was discussed. There are a number of items the board would still like to move forward on, but the timing was not appropriate for this year. Concerning some of the other bills that are relevant to the professions, I'll just highlight a few of these to make sure that you are monitoring them. One of these just came to my radar, and so I don't know a great deal about this bill, but I wanted to make sure you were all aware of it. It is House Bill 441. It has been referred to the Committee on Education, and the official summary of House Bill 441 or 441 is that it would be enacting the Applied Behavior Analysis Services in School Act, authorizing medically necessary behavioral health services in schools to students with autism and third-party payment for such services, requiring private providers of such services to submit a criminal history record check, requiring school districts to adopt policies and provisions of such services. So you might be more familiar with this bill, but I wanted to make sure that you all were aware of it. And definitely we can discuss any of these bills that I'll highlight. So that bill has been referred to the Senate Committee on Education.
Yes, it has.
And-
That's
and-
partly because of a group that I participate in.
Okay.
And it's in response to a letter that the the Kansas Board of Education was given to the local school districts on the violations of ADA by not allowing, they were explicitly excluding ABA providers in most school districts. And so the Kansas Department of the big board of education sent out guidance to all of the local school district boards that said, you can't do this. And so this is kind of in response to that as well.
Okay.
I will also say, just because I sit on an organization that works with schools, they are also, they're BCBAs, school-based BCBAs. They are also working on disseminating information about what ABA is, how it can work in schools, what the different licensures mean, and things like that.
Yep. I saw something from Pam.
Okay. Well, I see that was referred to the Senate Committee on Education. I don't see that's been scheduled for a hearing yet. But if you want to monitor that, and I'll touch upon this, I'll go through some individual bills that I've been able to kind of spotlight here. But if you do want to track things happening during the legislative session, one of the nice tools on the legislative website, there is a drop down for calendars. And if you go to the front page of the website and use that drop down for calendars, they have 3 links. One is the House calendar, one is the Senate calendar, and then there's a page that says, what is a calendar? And so if you haven't looked at those, it's a helpful daily PDF. There's a different House calendar than Senate calendar. And really what you're looking for this purpose is you go to the back half of the calendar. At the beginning, they talk about sort of all the bills that have been introduced and which committee those bills have been assigned to, but really the actual daily calendar is towards the back half. And what it does is it sorts out all the committees for the House and the House calendar, and then it has them arranged by when those committees start during the day. So the earliest committee would come first, and you would see on a daily basis what's on that schedule for Monday through Friday. And if it's towards the end of the week, they might have after that, what's going to happen the following week on a daily basis. And so you can kind of look through that, and it's a pretty good way to sort of see which items have been scheduled for hearings. Separately, most committees usually schedule one day to hear a bill, and that involves a lot of the testimony from stakeholders and providers. And then separately than that, the committee usually schedules a day to work a bill if they would like to make amendments to the bill or just vote it out of committee, usually favorably. It's generally not voted out if it's unfavorable. And if the committee is not supportive of the bill, sometimes they won't work bills. Not every bill gets a hearing, and not every bill that gets a hearing will actually be worked. But that's the process. And so if you do want to kind of track to see for the remainder of the session, if there's going to be relevant bills that have been scheduled for hearings, that's probably a good way to do that. Just check the daily calendar. These usually come out in the evenings for the next day. And so that way you can kind of look ahead and plan accordingly. And I realize, with different work responsibilities, it's really tough to be at the Capitol for those hearings. Another nice tool is the legislature does have a pretty good YouTube channel, and they live broadcast all the committee meetings now. And they're not just live broadcasts, they're available archived as well. So if there is a hearing you want to go back and find, you should be able to do that from the legislative website. But like I said, I'll go ahead and highlight a few of the bills that I've been tracking and just kind of let you know where these bills are currently at. This is a biennium for the legislature. So in Kansas, the legislative session lasts 2 years, and then things sort of start over again. Senate length of terms are 4 years, but for all the House members, they have 2-year terms. And when we consider bills, they can be introduced during the first year or they can be introduced during the second year. There are some reasons why a bill might die for some technical purposes, but essentially, I track some of the bills that were introduced last year that are still alive, and then I look at the new bills that are introduced this year as well. So I'll primarily focus on the new bills that are introduced this year. One of those bills is House Bill 2352. I found that bill interesting. It would require a duly ordained minister of religion to report certain abuse and neglect, except when reporting would violate the penitential communication privilege and require training. The bill was originally scheduled for a hearing a couple times, and some of those hearings were moved around and canceled. Ultimately, on Friday, February 6th, it was voted out of the House Judiciary Committee favorably for passage. So that bill is available to be worked on the House floor. There's also House Bill 2420, and that would require parental consent prior to the provision of any school-based mental health services to a student. It was introduced by Representative Steele. It was referred to the Committee on Education. It had a hearing on January 22nd in the House Education Committee. They voted the bill out favorably for passage on February 3rd. And then on February 12th, it was withdrawn from the House calendar and re-referred to the Committee on Education. So unsure what the future of that bill will look like, but that's where it is currently housed, is back in the committee. House Bill 2428. If you are interested in tracking some of the discussion on the topic of DEI for the legislature this year, that is one of the bills that I have heard is relevant to that conversation. House Bill 2428 would require the State Board of Regents to establish curricula and designate courses at post-secondary educational institutions related to DEI/CRT related courses and content, and require the study of American institutions and certain programs at freshman orientation concerning free speech. So that bill, House Bill 2428, was scheduled to be worked by the House Education Committee on Wednesday, February 11th. I believe that has moved now to today, Friday, February 13th. So that is scheduled to be worked, I believe, today. House Bill, 2480 is also an interesting bill. House Bill 2480 is very similar to a bill that was introduced last legislative session. It primarily concerns social workers at this point, but if it passes, I could see it potentially being extended to other professions. It would create an exception to certain mandatory reporting obligations for social workers that are working under the supervision of an attorney, and also permit an attorney to require a social worker to keep ethical obligations of attorney-client privilege while working under the supervision of such attorney. So essentially, this is intended to resolve a conflict of law Right now, if a social worker is working for an attorney and they learn certain information, the mandatory reporting laws say you need to report this information. However, under the attorney-client privilege understanding, that information is supposed to be kept confidential. So you're being pulled in one way based on mandatory reporting, pulled in another direction based on confidentiality. If this bill does pass, what it would do, it would allow social workers to essentially exert a defense if they did not disclose something under mandatory reporting, that they could say that they learned that through the course of their employment and that information was confidential because of attorney-client privilege. Similarly, it would allow the attorney to exert that over the social workers that are in their employment. Let's see here. There are a couple of bills that are somewhat interesting as it relates to artificial intelligence that have been introduced this year. One bill that I saw scheduled, I believe, in a House committee, maybe the House Modernization Committee, would create a legislative committee to look at artificial intelligence for the future. But the one that I think is most relevant to the work of mental health professionals is probably Senate Bill 405. Senate Bill 405 would make it unlawful for a person to knowingly train artificial intelligence to encourage or support suicide or the unlawful killing of another person, provide emotional support, develop emotional relationships, act as a healthcare professional, simulate humans, or encourage isolation. And so Senate Bill 405 was just recently introduced. It did receive a hearing on Monday of this past week in the Senate Fed and State Affairs Committee. So that's the last action I've seen on that bill. I'm not sure that bill will move forward this session or not, but if you are interested in kind of looking to see what the legislature in Kansas is possibly considering as far as regulating AI, Senate Bill 405 might be a good bill to be tracking as well. I'll transition to board meetings with connecting one other bill that has been discussed this year, and that is House Bill 2506. So House Bill 2506 is relevant to the addiction counseling profession, but it would create a new level, a new license type of addiction counselor called an apprentice addiction counselor. Unfortunately, when that bill was introduced, as I was reviewing the bill, it appeared to lack education and training requirements necessary to do the proposed scope of practice as described in the bill. So we reached out to the advocates of the bill, had a number of conversations. Ultimately, we were able to schedule a quick board meeting on January 27th, just to allow the board the opportunity to review that bill and ask the board members would they like testimony provided at a hearing. The board did express concern about those same issues, the lack of education, the lack of training, some of the other issues based on the way the bill was written as well. And ultimately, the board did say if there is a hearing, we would like the BSRB to provide opponent testimony highlighting the areas of concern. And so we drafted that. I met with the chair of the committee, Representative Will Carpenter, explained the board's position and the concerns. He canceled the hearing to allow us all to work together to try to come to a compromise solution that can move forward this session. Unfortunately, when we gathered all the individual advocates and stakeholders together, we were not able to come to a compromise solution. There's a number of things that still need to be worked through, and there are certain positions that are very far apart concerning the position of a lot of the addiction professionals and then the advocates who wanted additional individuals to employ, and the BSRB for different concerns as well. And so what we did is we came to a compromise of continuing to work on these topics with a deadline goal of July 31st. And so we'll be meeting with those advocates to try to come to a proposal to look at whether a new license type would be helpful, whether an expansion of our existing student temporary licensees for addiction counseling would be helpful, or some other method that could address the goals and the interest of the stakeholders, but also the concerns of the other individuals that are involved in that discussion. So if you have seen House Bill 2506 in the calendar a couple times, scheduled for hearing, this may help explain why it was initially out there and then pulled back. But a lot of work has gone into that behind the scenes. And I'm pleased now with the current position. And I want to thank Representative Will Carpenter, the chair of the House Health and Human Services Committee, because I really appreciate his communication and his understanding of the complexities of these issues, and that he's allowing us additional time to work on these things behind the scenes. So I think whatever final version comes forward, I think it'll be much better than the proposed legislation of House Bill 2506. I'll just make another note about some recent board meetings. The last time the board met for a full board meeting was back at the beginning of January. And just a couple items from that meeting. The board did consider a number of the recommendations that had been forwarded to the board from the different advisory committees. They had a chance to go through a lot of the regulations that had been recommended for change, and they recommended all those continue to move forward. They also expressed a desire to put together a multi-year strategic plan for the agency, and they asked board members to come to the March meeting with sort of a SWOT analysis in mind. And then they're continuing to work through those unprofessional conduct regulations. So, but I'll pause here. I know I covered a lot of different bills during that legislative update. I'll see if you guys have any questions on any of those bills, or there's any other legislative topics that you're interested in discussing.
I have a question.
Mhm.
Would it be in our interest to have an educational memo that goes out to our legislators that informs them that if they have a bill that comes across their plate, or however that works, that the first step in the procedure would be to check with the BSRB to ensure that they had prior knowledge of a bill being introduced that it would be our responsibility to oversee?
I think we could request that happen. I think it makes a lot of sense. I think if the advocates for 2506 would have come to the BSRB and requested assistance or support, or even just informed us of that, I think some of the technical aspects of the bill could have been addressed. There are some core issues there, but I think that there were a number of really technical items too that there just was a lack of dialogue. And it sounds like they had been talking more with representatives from the Department for Aging and Disability Services, KDADS, but we are two different entities and we have two different jurisdictions. And yeah, I think it would have been helpful if they would have reached out. So I'm not sure, we can't really direct the legislature to make sure things come to us. We can just try to work on building good relationships and make sure that, if they are connected to bills, that they include us as part of that conversation. And I think the board has been very vocal about wanting to help out with workforce development. So I think we want to be good partners in this, but I think that's a good idea for us to be more involved in some of those conversations.
I have a sort of related follow-up question.
Mhm.
Would it be of interest, as someone that has just now started to dip a toe, and I have a board manager and a lobbyist that do all of the things, but dipping a toe into the legislative process, would it make sense for the BSRB, in collaboration with maybe another group, be able to offer education on what that legislative process looks like and how maybe people that are certified can partake in that?
Yeah.
Because I don't think that there's anybody better informed than you.
He's pretty informed. We're fortunate.
Yes. And I think that it would be of value for not just behavior analysts, but all of those that are certified to understand that our licensure is tied to the legislature, and that there's bills and things that have gone through, and that's why we have to get licensed. And so how that impacts their work. It might be interesting to have a CEU. I don't even know if that could be a CEU for behavior analysts necessarily, but just a lunch and learn about the legislative process and how that impacts our licensure.
Okay.
And the things that might influence our work altogether, rather.
That would be a good opportunity for community engagement.
Yeah, thanks, Linda.
Yeah. No, I think that's true. I come from sort of a unique background because I spent so many years working over inside the Capitol, and then I've been in this role, so I've kind of seen it from a few different viewpoints. But yeah, there's a number of these tools that are out there and available, but it's also not. There's not a lot of instructional resources that kind of say here's how to here are the tools that are available, and
I'll
then
be
here's how
honest,
to use
even
it.
just understanding the process, like you just explained it to us, like how the House bills move through, right? Like how the bills move through the House, and then like even just explaining that process as that relates to our licensure, like how that has happened, maybe a history of that to begin with, but then also just these are the things that might influence your work as a psychologist, as a social worker, as a behavior analyst, and here's how you can follow them. Similar to what you kind of just did for us, but like maybe more in depth on what the impact of those might be.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, I hadn't thought of putting something like that together, but I see some value, a lot of value to that too. Yeah.
Yeah. Even if it's like a YouTube that you like recorded and we could just like, anyway, okay.
Okay.
Thank you. That's all I had.
Good suggestion. I'll put my mind to that and see if I can come up with something. Because yeah, we've talked about using the YouTube channel a little bit more. That dangerous phrase, as time allows. We'd like to add some more educational resources on there, but I do want to record a few things. And we did use it for, the advisory committee training this year as an on-demand training. And I think overall that's worked out pretty well. So yeah, I will put my mind to this and see what I can come up with.
I did like that we had to do that on a YouTube video. We parallel worked. It was great. It was
Good.
fun.
All right. Any other questions? No? All right. Well, thank you, David, as always. It's always very informative. When I first started, it was a little bit overwhelming, right? But that just speaks to what Allison was just talking about, is just trying to educate the field in general about how the process works, because it really is at some point the man behind the curtain, and nobody has a chance to pull that curtain aside and see how it really works. But we should all be aware of it. So thank you. All right. Anything else before we move into old business?
Nothing more
Nope.
for me.
All right. Anybody else? All right. So the first item under old business is that continued review of we've done a really good job with looking at the survey and discussing it, and wanted to just open it up if anybody had any other questions or comments or discussion on our survey that we put out and reviewed in detail. If there's any items that stood out, that just think about it as we're going through the rest of the meeting, because if we get down there under new business, item C, we're going to talk about topics for this current year that we're in, and just think about the questions that were on that survey and the responses, and if there's anything in that that you think could we could address as a advisory committee. Just think about that, and we can add it into our topics for discussion. Okay. Anything you want to say on that, David?
Nope. I just want to thank the advisory committee for all their work going through and analyzing those questions. And I think a lot of the discussion has been very valuable. So thank you for all your work.
Yeah, thanks. All right. Item B, AI. It was interesting, the legislation that you said was currently being considered. There was actually a case, I think it was in Illinois or something. I think it's one of the ones that I might have forwarded on, where a young man was talking to his therapist, it turned out it was AI, and the AI suggested he kill himself or something like that, so he did. So it's, there are some pretty potentially lethal consequences on the use of AI, especially in human services. So, how would we like to frame this discussion? Any thoughts, David?
Well, I do want to highlight a few resources in your packet. We've been trying to study this, and as we find more resources, we share them accordingly. So, in your packet, you have one document that is titled Artificial Intelligence and Behavior Analysis Guidelines for Ethical Use. That is from the Artificial Intelligence Consortium for Applied Behavior Analysis. It's about an 18-page document. You also have just about a 3-page article that talks about the APA guidance on evaluating AI tools for psychological practice. So feel free to take a look at that. There are a couple other resources that we just kind of wanted to highlight. There is an article from the New York Times talking about what artificial intelligence can do, what it can't do, and how to tell the difference. And so that is perhaps an article worth taking a look at. We didn't share that article because, with the New York Times article and permissions for accessing certain articles, that may be one that you can best access on your own. And then there was also another article, and I was able to kind of take a look at sort of a limited summary of it, but it's called Informed Consent for Ambient Documentation Using Generative AI in Ambulatory Care. So I thought that was interesting too. Linda had shared those articles with me. And so we tried to share what we could, and then we figured we could kind of discuss the other two. So if you wanted to go find those resources to look at them as well. Again, the title of that was called Informed Consent for Ambient Documentation Using Generative AI in Ambulatory Care. And I think at the last meeting, I also provided some additional resources. I think there was a document from Utah that talked about artificial intelligence for mental health practitioners. And then there was a summary of 3 different laws that had changed in 3 different states, one in Illinois, one in Nevada, and then one in Utah. Utah's done quite a bit of work on regulating artificial intelligence so far. They're one of the leaders statewide. And so wanted to give you an opportunity too, if you had some comments based on the documents that we handed out at the last meeting, now that you've had a chance to kind of review those, or highlight in these new documents if anything came to mind. But just wanted to circle back around on this topic and see if there was anything new you wanted to discuss. Alternatively, I can tell you some of the advisory committees are coming to the end of their discussion on this topic, and there's about 3 main areas that appear to be the most popular areas for recommendations. So if you feel like you're ready for recommendations, we could talk about those 3 areas. But hopefully that frames this part of the conversation today. So you can talk about any of those resources from the last meeting, any of the new resources, or perhaps what the other advisory committees are considering.
I would love to hear about what the other advisory committees are suggesting right now.
That's what I was going to say, because I think, there's probably still some gray areas about, as an advisory committee, what is, how much latitude do we have in making recommendations or suggestions? So, hearing what some of the other advisory committees came up with, I think would be beneficial for me. So.
Okay. Yeah, I'm happy to share that. As you know, we have 7 different advisory committees that meet for about 2 hours. Almost all of them meet every other month, the same month that you meet. The only exception is the Addiction Counseling Advisory Committee. They meet quarterly. But for the other advisory committees, it seems like a lot of their focus on recommendations for regulation of AI really have come down to about 3 main concepts. One, if you're using artificial intelligence in practice, It's very important that your informed consent notifies the clients that you are A, using artificial intelligence, and then B, how you are using it. And the second part of that is important because let's say that you're using it for marketing purposes or for things involving your website that don't directly involve client care. That may not be as relevant as if you are using AI to record sessions or to do other things. And so the first bit, informed consent, that you are using AI as part of your practice, and then also how you're using AI. So that informed consent piece is one that's really been popular. The second piece is the wording may be a little different committee to committee, but the general concept is if you're using artificial intelligence when providing care to clients, make sure that you are ensuring confidentiality of things that are intended to be confidential. And part of that has to do with knowing, are you using artificial intelligence to summarize some of these sessions? Do you know where that information is going? Is it a closed AI? Are things being deleted after something is created and being written? But essentially focusing on confidentiality. So informed consent first, confidentiality second. And then the third aspect is if you are utilizing artificial intelligence in practice, it's important that you provide the ability for a client to opt out. So if they don't want AI used as part of their treatment or services, that there is the ability to opt out. And I realize with your profession, sometimes, there are going to be minors receiving care. So maybe there should be some clarification, not just specifically about the client who has the ability to make these decisions, but also that it would be extended to someone who would be able to make decisions for the client if it's a minor or something like that. So.
Thank you. So once we have this discussion and come up with recommendations, what happens to those recommendations?
So the authority of this committee is to forward recommendations back to the board. And so those would go back to the board at a board meeting. And then ultimately it would be up to the board to decide, do you want to adopt these for one profession or multiple, or make this consistent, across the professions. So you could make a recommendation from your advisory committee, and then we would carry that forward to the board meeting. And then Linda, as chair, would be able to talk about that with the board members at the board meeting, or I'd be happy to clarify that too.
And then, and then after it goes to the board and it's adopted, let's make believe it's adopted, then what happens?
So I think, with this approach, what this is largely kind of focused on would be adding some clarifying language on artificial intelligence, most likely to the unprofessional conduct regulations. So when those are ready to go out there with the proposed changes, then they would essentially be opened up for public comment from anybody who wanted to comment back to the board, any topic, any feedback on any of the unprofessional conduct changes, including this new AI language.
Okay, perfect. So the work that we would be doing in this committee could directly impact potentially a provider's practice in the field.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. I just wanted to make that path clear so that we knew that the work that we're doing can have an impact on those who are currently providing services and future people.
Yeah, I think when this topic was initially discussed, there were a few different possible approaches. One would be, would the board want to introduce a bill specifically on artificial intelligence? And it seemed like, as it relates to statutes, that's probably something that's going to affect multiple agencies,
Is that
and
something that we could recommend at this point?
that there's a bill. Well, now that the legislature is looking at kind of addressing some of those things, potentially that could be something that maybe that it just seems like a broader topic than one agency. If there was going to be legislation specifically on it, another possible concept would have been, would the BSRB want to issue like an advisory opinion as it relates to AI? But in general, the board tries to stay away from that because really, as a state agency, our authority is limited to the statutes and regulations primarily. And so really we kind of look to see what's in law for the most part in terms of our authority. So having this as a responsibility under the unprofessional conduct standards seemed to be a nice path because it would fit under the regulations, which we have the ability to influence a bit more. And when it's ready to go forward, we can have that timing down. But also, if there are things the legislature does change in bill form, we can kind of adapt to that. If there's potentially a conflict with one of our recommendations and something they put into statute, we will modify it based on whatever they decide for every state agency. But at least we can move forward with recommendations for unprofessional conduct. So that seemed to be the preferred path.
And so out of the content areas that David talked about, which was informed consent, confidentiality, and the ability to opt out, are there any other things that you guys can think would be good for us to consider as well that may be different than those three content areas? You can take a minute to think about it, right? I'm okay with the silence for a minute or so while you think.
But I'm wondering if there's some way we would address like using a professional using AI to inform treatment that goes like against best practices or like our training, or like they're using it in place of continuing education, or something like that. I wonder if we need some guidelines around that.
And in different than what you just said, Kelly, for me, because we are working with a pediatric population, and specifically with a pediatric population that may be impacted by IDD and is, for most everybody on here, they would be impacted by autism, which their social communication is impaired, and which then perhaps impairs their, they might take things in a more black and white way. And so are there any considerations around the populations that we typically serve that would need to be included in our discussion or considerations?
I'm curious about the opt-out part. So my practice doesn't use it, but Rethink, as a data collection system, has a generative AI session summary feature that is all or nothing. So you have to assign it to all of your people, or you have to assign it to none of your people. We decided to opt out of that specifically because it was garbage, but an individual person saying, I don't want you to use generative AI for that, wouldn't be an option in that case. Like if our company is using they would just have to revoke services in that case. Like I know that's very much in the weeds about kind of what we're talking about, but it's another consideration. Like they wouldn't be able to opt out in that instance. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So how do I remain compliant on both sides?
In which case, it should be guidance to those companies that, as legislation comes down the pike, that includes a requirement that a patient or consumer has the right to opt out, that they will be losing money because we cannot be engaging in unethical practices as it relates to our licensing board. And so we would have to then go with a different company, one that allowed an individual consumer to opt out. I think that's information that needs to be shared. Because that is in all those articles and in all the discussions that I've had about this over the last week, and all the group supervision meetings and whatnot, having the ability to opt out has been in 100% of them.
I'm gonna be annoying. I'm sorry.
That's okay. You be annoying, Allison.
I understand that to some capacity. I feel like it's back when like the internet came out and people were like, well, I'm never gonna do, like, we talked about that a little bit last time, right? Where it's like, this is coming whether people like it or not. And
Right.
I don't love it. Please trust and believe I don't love it. But like, I had to write a policy that said that my staff were not able to wear AI glasses in the clinic because that's a new thing that people are doing now. So like, an individual is not going to be able to completely opt out of AI. Like, AI is everywhere. I mean, look at the Super Bowl commercials where they are basically using like surveillancing with Ring doorbell. You know what I mean? Like, AI is everywhere. So
Right,
how do
but
we...
it's how we use it in our practice, Allison, that's important, because
I get that. I get that. I'm more of like, they couldn't then make us, I'm just thinking about like, a consumer could not then tell us that we can't use the internet with their kid. Like, the internet is the internet, and is what it is. Does that make sense? I'm not a proponent for AI. I sound like I am right now. I'm really not. I'm just thinking, like, if we legislated that you have to be able to opt out on something that maybe doesn't have anything to do with your personal health information, you can't really tell a practice how to do their practice. Like, if it doesn't have their personal health information in it, they don't really get a say over that.
if the AI scans the record in order to generate documentation for that session, it will have their personal information in it.
So that what I understand, but like, if like you were saying earlier, David, that marketing is how we use it, they can't really opt out of that. Like, I'm not going to stop using that. If I'm using generative AI, like I'm using a Gemini AI to write a session note that doesn't have any other personal identifying information in it, it just is helping me like summarize, okay, I need to write this paragraph, I need this in a paragraph form, and it doesn't have the kid's information in it. It doesn't have the kid's name, date of birth, other personally identifying information in it. They can't opt out of that because it's not their personal health information at that point. Do you know what I mean? Again, right. I sound like I'm a proponent for AI. I'm really not. I'm just trying to think about, like, legislating this sounds like an absolute nightmare.
Well, I think right now we're not talking about legislating it. I think we're coming up with guidelines for our regulations.
But I do think, Allison has raised a couple points that a couple of the other committees have talked about. There are certain technologies where there's a question about, is AI embedded in this and is it not? There's very clear uses of AI, but as a lot of products are continuing to add a little AI here, add a little AI there, if it is so embedded into different things,
there's an AI on TikTok now. Like, there's an AI and literally, like, Facebook has an AI, TikTok has an AI, Google, Microsoft has Copilot. Like, it sounds rough.
Well, there's a few different issues here because, on one hand, you could approach it from a perspective of saying, if you use a product that you know has AI, you could come at it from like a knowing standpoint. Although it's difficult because you go down that road and then
People are
say,
liars.
well, I'm using a product and I didn't realize there was AI there, but you probably are still responsible, and so it's a complicated matter. But people have talked about, well, what if it's so embedded in all of your resources that you really couldn't functionally turn it off for just one client? And what does that mean? And would they have to go find care elsewhere? And so some of these topics have been talked about by other committees, and I don't know what
What was the solution for that? Did they just not, they didn't agree on one?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first two, as it came to informed consent and confidentiality, I think there has been probably a universal agreement. It's the third one, as far as the opting out, that I've heard some concerns by some of the advisory committees as far as the feasibility of that, or if that's something that you need to allow, or it's something that you should allow. But there hasn't been as uniform agreement as far as that last one.
I'm also thinking like I have cameras in my parking lot where there's no expectation of privacy because I live on North Broadway in Wichita. And so like they can't opt out of that or they just don't get services. You know what I mean? If you don't want to be on camera, first of all, it's not a possibility in this day and age. But second of all, like I have to protect your cars. So but there's no expectation of privacy there. It's the same it's parallel in my brain that we're talking about this because it is coming and it is going to impact everybody.
And it may be that it is parallel, but one is in a public setting with no
Expectation.
obligate for privacy, where the other is PHI. And
But if it
so
doesn't have PHI, like,
huh?
I said, if it doesn't have PHI, like the marketing,
Well, I think David was saying that's different, is what I think David was saying. He was saying there's a difference between using AI for marketing or public facing stuff like that. You don't need to have a patient opt out.
okay.
It's
I'm thinking
only
like
when it's
for our
being
circle
used.
time. I use it to create a circle time program. I haven't done that, but it's just the thing that came to my mind. Technically, it impacts their services, but there's no PHI that's related to it. Are they still allowed to opt out?
I think you're right when you say that's somewhat in the weeds, but it does need to be considered because I think if you're using it to produce therapeutic materials, that's not specific to an individual child's session notes or documentation about their individual progress. It's just materials.
Yeah.
Right. You could argue that anytime you enter results from a Vineland or an Ables or a VB map into their portals, that compromises the integrity of their PHI, right? But those have been around for a long time. I think that there are ways that we can use this for the betterment of humanity and ways that it can be used to the detriment of humanity. And I think it's up to us to provide guidelines on how to be able to use it. We know it's coming. How to be able to use it in such a way that it guides people towards being able to use it for, for not for the dark side. So, and I think, and this just popped into my head, and I don't have the answers, so any more than you guys feel like you do. But the language should be, to the extent possible that a client has the ability to opt out, they should be given that opportunity. And then that means if you have AI that's embedded into your whole practice management software. For me, when I join a Zoom meeting and somebody's AI note taker has entered the meeting, I just read stop read and it goes away, right? So maybe for an individual that wanted to opt out, you would go back to the old-fashioned way and just take data and notes by hand.
Paper and pencil graphs. We're doing highlighters again,
That's
Linda.
my favorite.
Give me a highlighter. I had a maroon one for 15 years.
Absolutely. Paper and pencil graphs with a highlighter. That's my favorite. So
I actually use them for one kid, for one behavior, because they're way easier. Anyway.
absolutely, sometimes it's a lot easier to read. So anyway, so it would be probably further discussion so that then we can craft some recommendations about AI, right?
Can we use AI to generate our recommendations for AI?
Absolutely.
Perfect.
Didn't we use AI to generate our description
did.
of behavior analysis? Yeah,
We sure
I
did.
thought so. But what about those three content areas? Well, I would say four. Um, consent. What was the middle one? An opt-out, consent,
Confidentiality.
confidentiality, opt-out, and I would say vulnerable
extent-
populations.
I would say the extent to the definition. Is that the beginning one?
Yeah, the extent to which.
You're not going to tell me I can't use it for marketing because I do it. And I'm going to keep doing it. Where'd you go, Linda?
I'm right here. I have to mute for a minute.
Okay. Well, I think maybe continue to look at the new materials that you have in your packet for today. I really think this has been a great conversation, and Allison, I appreciate you bringing up those items because what you are bringing forward needs to be something we consider when we think about the language, because if there is a recommendation that will become something that's a part of the professional conduct regulations, if we ever would get a complaint that deals with artificial intelligence, our complaint review committee would be asked to take a reasonable approach to that situation, but they would be guided by whatever language comes forward. So if we do need to be very specific and say, as it relates to personal identifiable information about a client, if we need to be very specific about how we're using this recommendation, I think that's good because
I do like Kelly's suggestion though about the replacement of clinical judgment, and that also needs to be one of the things that we are providing guidance on. People should not be using AI as a replacement for their CEUs or in replacement of using their own brains, please and thank you.
I have to jump into this discussion for just a second and say I have to change locations. I'm still here, I'm listening, but I won't be able to talk for 30 seconds.
Okay, no problem, Linda.
So I do think that is another area that we need to focus on as well, is that continuing education, you should still not be practicing outside of your scope, even if you're using AI.
Mm-hmm.
Especially if you're using AI, actually. Let's use especially.
Yeah. It's interesting. I think one of the comments someone mentioned earlier is, are you practicing as a reasonable person when you're using AI? But as AI is just sort of a new tool in this process, it's a little unclear, at least for me, what the acceptable use of AI would be at the moment, because we don't have enough data points as far as people using AI in some of these areas. When we polled people on the survey, a lot of people said, I'm not using AI, and I know that's increased a lot in a very short period of time. But I don't know that we have a lot of data that says right now what specifically people are using it for, aside from some things like, grammar and word choice, or now I think some people are using it for things like public minutes, where there's no issue as far as privacy. But
My policy for my families that's in our parent handbook about, because I already have something about it, because some of my staff use it because they have ADHD or whatever, and it's easier, me specifically, is that we utilize generative AI technology to like assist in streamlining session note summaries, but we use a HIPAA compliant implementation within our secure enterprise environment with the BAA, and to make sure that we're still protecting your confidentiality, only non-personally identifying information is processed by the AI. And so that they know that, like, yes, we use it, but, like, we don't use it for your PHI necessarily. And yes, it has increased significantly since we did the survey. I'm getting
yeah. Well, any other comments on this topic? We're probably going to have to revisit this the next meeting, which is totally fine because we've had a really good discussion here and there's been some new topics that have been brought up. So,
All right.
I'm pretty sure that my camera is AI now too, and it keeps zooming in on me, and it's really annoying. I don't know how to turn it off.
So, all right. So how about if we add that to,
Linda, I think Pickwell wanted to say something. Sorry, I saw
oh,
her
I'm sorry. Yeah.
No, I really enjoy the conversation, and I think Allison really brought up very, very practical points. And I think we are talking about like regulating how AI is used, but I think we can also consider another direction is to what needs to be done. So like we can document like the human in the loop, which is like last time our guest speaker talked about how very important that we can generate a treatment plan draft and then we add in like what we think is more appropriate, so we use it as a brainstorming, whatever, right? But then that we can document the human in the loop. So maybe we can like instead of regulating how AI is used, but maybe think about another path is like what needs to be done to ensure that we are responsibly and ethically using AI in the field. So just a thought.
I think the human
Yeah.
in the loop piece is a big piece of that. So good point. Like that.
Yeah.
Jot that down, David. Human
Well,
in the
yeah,
loop.
we should put that under 6C so that we're continuing to discuss it. I agree that human in the loop is the big piece, and because there's instances of using AI to generate a treatment plan with no human in the loop, right? And we know, and like, just coming back to what has been said, it's here. It's not going away. And we just need to think about how, like, what we have the authority to do as an advisory committee to provide advice and regulation or guardrails around how people use it. So, yeah. Perfect. All right. Well, any other comments on that before we move on to the next item, which is, David, continued review of regulations?
yes. So we have in your packet a copy of KAR 102-8-6. And as we were going through the regulations, some information was shared that what BACB may require for supervision may look a little different than what the supervision regulation talks about. And so, in talking with Leslie Allen, who is the Assistant Director and Licensing Manager for the BSRB, she and I had a conversation about this initial regulation, and this regulation was last updated in 2016, and it sounded like some of the information in this regulation was influenced by maybe what BACB was looking at as far as supervision at that time, but now it's been about 10 years. So I think the advisory committee had expressed a desire to revisit this regulation, keeping in mind what BACB is looking at to see if some of this language should be changed to more closely match what the prevailing association is looking for supervision.
I definitely think that members of this committee would be interested in looking at this and making sure that it aligns with the current regulatory authority.
And this regulation talks about both licensed behavior analyst and also licensed assistant behavior analyst. So we want to make sure that we cover both of those topics in this discussion. But it is a fairly short regulation. So I think I'll probably best turn it over to the members of the committee. If there, I think there had been a member or two in the past that maybe volunteered to kind of spearhead this discussion. And Leslie, is there anything else you wanted to mention about this regulation before we open it up for discussion?
What the
No, I don't have anything.
no?
Mm-mm.
Here's a question. In Kansas, we don't regulate registered behavioral technicians, RBTs, but it is a requirement that they are supervised, and it is the responsibility of the LBA or the LABA to supervise them. Is that something that needs to be included in here? Even though we, the state of Kansas, don't regulate them?
It, maybe, because in social work, they have a supervision regulation and it talks about supervising what I think are like, social service designees and, nursing homes. So we have what the social worker who is licensed needs to make sure to do, even though the person that they're supervising is not licensed. So you may want to include that.
Yeah.
And if I'm way off and the AG says, no, you can't do that, then, we'll, we'll go from there. Because theirs was written a long time ago, so.
So what do y'all think of that? Do you guys all think it should be included?
I've been talking a lot, so I'm gonna be quiet this time.
Allison, I would expect nothing less. Speak up.
I think it sounds like very complicated to monitor. I mean, the BACB is already doing it. Are we talking about doing it for the IIS, which the state of Kansas does have purview over?
No, we're just talking about adding in here something that relates to the BACB, basically, that says as a licensed behavior analyst or assistant behavior analyst in the state of Kansas, it's your ethical obligation to provide appropriate supervision to your unlicensed technicians according to the regulations set forth by your regulatory board or something like that. I just totally made that up off the top of my head.
It was beautiful.
Thank you. You can call me AI.
We're gonna get an LHP.
Gen 1 AI.
An LHP Gen 1 first model.
So I will say, for us, we have to have the RBTs, of course, do their RBT logs, right? Where they make sure that they've met their supervision requirements. Here at our clinic, I have everyone do it so that I make sure that I've met that with everyone across the board, correct?
You
But
can
we
have
do.
IIS do it if they're not certified.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's the way we're doing it currently, because I just want to make sure we meet those supervision requirements. But per the BACB, I don't have to do that for those
I mean, I guess I do because I'm providing supervisory. Yeah, that's a gray area.
Well, we require it like credentialing. We take the highest requirements and we superimpose that on everyone. That way it's standard across the board. So Nikki, I get what you're doing as good practice. It's not required, but you have that one standard that is higher than the other standards, and just everybody adheres to that standard. But I'm looking at this strictly from a BACB lens, and the agreement between what our regulatory board requires from us and what's in our statute. Is that this a statute, David?
Regulation.
What's in this?
It's in the regulation.
Regulation. In the state of Kansas, which is our licensing body, right? So what is the agreement between those two? It doesn't have anything to do with IIS or standard of practice or anything. It's, do we want there to be agreement and inclusion in here? Do we want there to be an avenue? I'm making this up, that we have a BACB or an LBA that is egregious in their lack of supervision of their RBTs? Do we want something in our regulation that allows us to counsel them on appropriate professional conduct with regards to supervision of their unlicensed staff?
That sounds like maybe something, Dave, wouldn't that be an unprofessional conduct? Like when in the social work regulation that I was talking about, it has specifics, like you have to, make a plan and provide this much supervision, that kind of stuff. Since this is already written by BACB, may not be something you need to recreate in a regulation, but your unprofessional conduct, I would think, would include something about not being a good supervisor.
Mm-hmm.
So, Leslie, you don't think that it would be good to have something in here that, if nothing else, just referred them? That it's your requirement to provide appropriate supervision to unlicensed staff according to the prevailing regulatory board practices.
I don't know. I really don't know, because to be frank, we don't get a lot of questions from LBAs because BACB is so involved. There's not a lot of, social workers come to us and ask us because we're the over regulating, per board for them. But with you guys, it's different. So I don't know that. Perhaps that is a Tim question.
Well, and I think it's probably more of a matter of preference, because I think technically you could do that, but I think the board in general has kind of steered away from that. I think there's also some states that maybe say we will adopt the association's ethical codes or different things like that. But we've, at least in Kansas, there's been sort of a desire to say we don't mind looking at the same language, but we don't necessarily want to give up our ability to have our own sovereignty in terms of enforcing some of these things. So as it relates to kind of updating the language, that's something that's appropriate, but deferring to sort of a third party the state might not have control over, I think it technically could be done. There's usually just been a desire not to do that.
Well, and I remember that whole discussion, and but that was specifically about the two classes of professionals that were going to be licensed. right? We did not want to defer authority to an external or third party entity. This is not, I think this is different than that, and that this is just stating that the state recognizes that there is a supervisory responsibility of our LBAs and our LABAs to oversee their staff. And that, however, we're not in the business of licensing those staff, so they really do not fall under our jurisdiction. But it seems like the professional oversight of them does somewhat fall under our jurisdiction because it's a requirement of the BACB.
So yeah, it's complicated, for sure. Because I feel like, if the board doesn't have jurisdiction over the RBTs because they're not clarified there, the responsibility of someone the board does have responsibility over to provide supervision, I think that part could reasonably fall in there as far as a responsibility of practitioners licensed by the board. But yeah, I think it would just need to, we would want, and we could definitely match the same language that's used by BACB. I just think having a direct reference to probably a third party organization, even if it is very influential, probably would be something the board would likely want to steer away from. Your profession is a little unique in that it specifically names the BSAB or BACB in the statutes, whereas a lot of other professions don't specifically name, one entity, but it also allows for, substantial equivalence and things like that. So it opens it up to other groups too. So I would probably think, the language they use could be used, but probably the board would want to steer away from just naming them, or drawing a reference to them without really pointing specifically to one. So
yeah, and I think it's a good discussion because the only reason Article 8 was included was because it's a requirement of the BACB. Right? Kansas didn't care. You're licensed or you're not licensed, right? And our field was unique enough and new enough on the landscape that people weren't familiar with the different levels and what they all included. And so we relied heavily on the BACB, and that's why Article 8's included. So I guess the question is, since Article 8 is included because it reflects our requirements and our obligation to the BACB, does the advisory committee think it's useful to also include the supervisory obligation that our LBAs and our LABAs have over RBTs? And, I guess we can say no, right? I mean, we don't have to have it in there. It's up to us. We have the power. Power to the people.
So I think that we have this supervision regulation because statute says assistant behavior analysts have to practice under supervision. So it is, so something needs to be defined. Yeah. So I don't know if it would extend to the others. That might, yeah.
Yep. And that's because when this legislation came through, there was a push by all of us who were actively practicing at the time to make sure that it was as close as possible.
Right.
So. What do y'all think? Pam? Pickwa?
Not Allison.
No, Allison, I know that you'll speak up.
I will never
I,
let this
I
be a
just, I was
boring
just
meeting.
picking
Don't
on,
you ever worry about that. Not
I was
never.
just picking on them because they're in university settings and they're. Any thoughts? Holly?
Can I ask a question? So currently in that Article 8, when we say supervision for the BCABA under a BCBA, do any reporting needs to happen on any regular basis? Because I was just thinking about the logistic. If we do require the the supervision of like RBT being also included here, would that what does that look like? If that makes sense. I'm just trying to get a little bit more understanding because I've never had to do any. I mean, I report to the BACB on the portal for RBT supervisions and ongoing things like that, but just what the BSRB do we
So,
what is
we don't require that those logs be submitted to us. If someone is audited when they renew their license, we may request that they have their supervisor sign a form saying they have been providing their supervision. And we may request the logs if there's ever a question, but we don't just get them as a matter of every year or anything.
What about just making a statement that that we have a professional obligation to provide supervision to anyone that is providing direct care as it relates to ABA? Just because we have the IAS and the RBT, we have an obligation to provide supervision over anyone that's providing direct care. Could we make a blanket statement like that, but then we'd have to say what is the appropriate supervision? Because we shouldn't have IIS providers running around without supervision.
We should.
Correct.
Correct. And yet.
I have another question, sort of kind of related to what Pickwa asked. In the subsection 1, it says no more than half of the supervision may be conducted in group under extenuating circumstances approved by the board. Additional group supervision may be allowed. They will have to submit a written request with a detailed explanation of the extenuating circumstances no later than 30 days before the request would take effect.
We have never received a request for that.
I didn't think you had, but everybody's more afraid of the BACB.
Yeah. Does the BACB allow that?
Not that I'm aware of.
The BACB is not gonna doesn't. Let me say that nicer. The BACB has a really hard time responding to their contact form as it is, so I don't see them asking for people to contact them for anything ever.
But they do. I mean, like they don't have the language that says if there's something that requires additional group. Because I don't know why we would have put it in there. Yeah.
At least not
They
currently.
don't. Yeah.
Okay.
It's like you have to submit it, and if you're out of ratio, then you lose those hours.
I
Is
think
that
that was
because
for,
the-
oh, sorry,
I'm
I
sorry,
think
go
that's specifically for the BCABA, not the RBTs.
Right.
Yeah, and I've been trying to look at the RBT handbook and trying to figure out, more structured like that, but I really can't find, specific things like that. So,
So are Linda, when you say that you're out of ratio, so the hours are lost, is that because LABAs are working on hours to become LBAs?
No, but they have to be required. They'd probably be sanctioned.
Oh, okay.
But some of them may be working towards becoming BCBAs, in which case then those hours would be lost.
But
And I've
BCABs
seen
are
that
also
happen
just required to have a certain amount of supervision, and that's part of it too. That's probably where that came from originally.
And there's a newer one, anybody that wants to provide supervision in the first year after becoming a BCBA needs to be supervised.
Look at us old folks not having to do that.
Yeah. But there's the APBA is putting out a program as well. So there's more pathways than there used to be. So I guess the question is going to be, how are we going to factor all that into our advisory committee? Just not germane to the current discussion. However, that also is coming down the pike.
Thank you for the heads up.
Who's the group that you referenced though, Linda? Who are you talking
APBA, Association for Professional Behavior Analysts. They came out with a course sequence and a credential, a program that it's more of a academic course
But
sequence.
that's training to obtain certification, not the certification requirements themselves, right?
Itself, right, is
Okay, just
right.
making sure I'm following.
Yeah, and so when we're looking at what their requirements are, and then of course there is the QABA, which I'm sure they'll come back again. And since they've already been here once or twice, David.
Probably twice.
Yeah. So, and then of course there's the IBAO, International Behavior Analysis, or the Institute of Behavior Analysis International or something like that. IBAO. Anyway, so this is tied pretty specifically to the BACB. Do we want to add anything in here about somewhat like what Holly said, where we just broaden the language to say should provide appropriate supervision to anybody that you have supervisory authority over regarding direct client care? So I see several thumbs up from people thinking that's a good idea. Emily, what do you think?
Can you say it again? Sorry. I got started thinking of the first part and then forgot the last part.
Like adding a language in here that outlines or states that you should provide appropriate supervision to anybody over who you have supervisory authority. particularly with regards to direct client care?
That should be fine in schools because if they that should work in schools.
Yeah.
Do we know if the APBA's requirements are less than the BACB's?
They're saying, like the last time we'll find out more because David and I are going down there.
Because I think that
We'll
might be, yeah, I haven't heard too much about it, or I haven't read too much about it. But if their requirements are less than the BACB, but the BACB is the governing agency of behavior analysts who the credential you, it might be worth giving credence to the other supervision and academic types of things, but referencing the BACB as the supervision that needs to happen, and the other ones are additional.
Yeah, because I'm all about
But
going for the one that has the most, just like we were talking about before.
Well, I guess even then, on the other hand, if the BACB says X hours and the APBA says X plus 500, you don't have to do the 500 to get credentialed. So I guess it keeps bringing me back to like referencing what the credentialing agency offers, and then we can always give a line to the other options that you have one way or next.
So, Leslie and David, is that something that you guys could craft some language that would be acceptable to? Now, here's the deal. Pickwa. Pickwa.
Oh, sorry, I was muted. And I just want to clarify one thing. I think the APBA, the accreditation thing is for programs, not, BCBAs or RBTs per se. You know what I'm saying? So they
Yeah.
have a new accreditation thing come out, but it's for programs that is training BCBAs. So so
Yeah. Right. That's right. And the QABA was a credentialing program.
Yeah. So I think if I was thinking the same thing as Pickwa, that I wasn't sure why we were talking about APBA versus BACB, because BACB is what's governing the certification of the practitioner. APBA is setting the standards for how those practitioners get trained. But QABA, that's more now what we're talking about with respect to credentialing of providers like the BACB does.
Right. Yeah,
Thank you. I was feeling a little lost.
yeah. Well, the BACB used to be the one that did the credentialing of the programs, and then it's split, and now it's ABAI that does that.
Okay.
Sorry.
Now I understand how people feel when I talk to them. I threw out all my acronyms.
So, so should this be something we ask you guys to come up? Like, can we do that? Can we change this?
Well, change
Or
it now. So let me ask this. First of all, according to what's written is how the assistant behavior analyst shall be supervised by the LBA, and how often and how much is group. Do you want to make any changes to that language, or is that language still acceptable?
So, I think all right, the yes, they do need to be licensed by BCBAs. I don't know if we want to look at what's in here, what the current regulations are, and provide information. Like a comparison for our next meeting. The other thing to just throw out there as well is that LABAs can also provide supervision to the RBT level.
Okay, that's where it's changing. Okay. I was kind of having trouble tracking this.
Mm-hmm.
I did want to mention that that thing that I sent in, that's the last thing on the list today. The public comment period is only until the 3rd of March.
Okay.
So we give like 5 minutes of it, just so people know about it and can.
So why don't we all commit to looking at this and looking at the current BACB standards for supervision of assistant behavior analysts, and then coming back next time with, if it's identical, nothing needs to be done. If there's differences, what that looks like, and then we can talk about whether or not we need to insert information about ethical supervision of RBT somewhere in the mix.
It'll be difficult because ethical isn't really something we use a lot in our regulations. The word ethical, and you can't really just say appropriate, because what does appropriate mean? So it'll have to be worded pretty, wordsmith pretty good, but yeah, bring back the ideas and we can look at them.
And then it sort of factors into the discussion on the QABA, factors into 5D. For me, I think for some of the other professions, the alternative pathway to licensure was more like experience versus, like, I'm making this up, addiction counselors don't need to have a bachelor's degree. They could have so many years experience in clean and sober, and that would qualify them. So I think we really need to get on our critical thinking caps about that, and everybody state their opinion. I'm pretty sure it's going to be a strong opinion on that particular line item. I suggest we move that to next time. Is everybody okay with that?
Sounds good.
Okay. Thanks, Kelly. All right, new business. Once again, David, you want to talk about how we decided, I think, not to pursue it, just to refresh everybody's memory, and then what we could potentially do this year on that?
Yeah, there was a proposal from the advisory committee to ask for the board's support on a bill that would add a behavior analyst specifically under the list of board members for the BSRB. There's a statute that outlines who serves on the board, and it's 12 positions, 8 professional, 4 public. But when the behavior analyst profession was added, that statute was not changed to add a behavior analyst position on the board. So while there is currently a behavior analyst and that Linda holds that license, she is officially on the board as a licensed psychologist. So that is one of the recommended changes that was going to move forward in legislation. And so that is something still available for the board to move forward on. The board has already expressed its support for that, but sort of separate from that item was title protection for licensed behavior analysts. Some of the other professions in their statutes, it outlines who can officially use what terminology, and for individuals that use that terminology wrongfully, it would be essentially a violation, and the board would have authority to, ask them to stop doing that or refer that to other legal authorities to pursue sort of people not using certain terminology unless they are officially licensed as individuals in that profession. So, one thing that kind of connects what we were just talking about is that Linda and I are attending the upcoming APBA conference, and there is a meeting of regulators specifically at that conference. So I was going to ask all of you if there's any topics you'd like us to ask the regulators about when we were at that conference. But as a topic for this, we can ask them how many states have specific title protection in their laws. Because for that to be added, it's not something that can be added under the regulations. It would specifically need to go into the statutes. So a bill would need to be passed that would add that. So we have to be very specific if that was going to be a recommended change. So maybe looking at some other states that do have title protection for behavior analysts would be a good first step. So I'd be happy to kind of float that out there to the regulators attending that conference and get some feedback from them, which states have title protection, and the ones that do, what specifically does it protect? I'm not sure it could be broad enough to protect the term behavior analyst, but licensed behavior analyst does match some of the other professions. And perhaps there are some states that do protect the term behavior analyst too. So be happy to start this conversation and address it that way. So,
Are y'all good with that? Yeah. That's a good idea. Good idea, David.
thanks.
You should apply for the executive director position.
I'll keep that in mind.
Okay. All right. So, there is, David did include the Practice Act
And
that we
Linda,
can
do
take.
you want me to kind of frame this briefly first? Okay.
Yes.
So I included a few documents in your packet. Allison, I believe, had sent the email as far as the APA Model Practice Act and that language for discussion. But if you're not familiar with Model Practice Acts and some of how this might relate to us as a licensing authority in Kansas, essentially, for the profession of psychology, which does involve sort of a lot of the behavior analysis concepts too, because some states do have that as a section under psychology. There is a regulatory association that helps states and other jurisdictions that regulate psychology, and that is the Association of State and Provincial Psychology Boards, ASPPB. And separately, there is also the entity that the accreditation for psychology programs, and that is the APA, American Psychological Association. And so ASPPB assists state regulatory boards and has in the past had a Model Practice Act. And the Model Practice Act is not controlling upon any of those states or jurisdictions, but in my opinion, it sort of sets out best practices so that if you are looking at your practice act and any of those sections in law, it kind of gives guidance and says, we think if you are writing this from scratch or if you're considering redoing some of these sections, that you would use this language. Recently, APA has been looking at accrediting more programs, specifically master's level psychology programs. And at the same time that they are moving forward at accrediting master's level psychology programs, they have put out, they've been working on coming out with a Model Practice Act for the psychology profession. So ASPPB has a Model Practice Act. Separately, APA is planning to put out a Model Practice Act as well. And so, just as what I said with the ASPPB Model Practice Act, it's not controlling upon jurisdictions, but it is something out there sort of held out as sort of a best practice standard if you are considering changing things. So I did want to kind of frame that first. It does not have controlling authority over us, but it is something out there. And there has been a lot of conversation about the proposed APA Model Practice Act It is open for public comment. As Allison said, that public comment time period does close, I think, March 3rd. So if the committee normally would want to make a recommendation to the board, and then the board would provide public comment on behalf of the BSRB, unfortunately, that public comment time period is going to close before the board have an opportunity to meet and consider recommendations. So I'll turn it over to all of you for discussion. But if you did have any recommended changes, unfortunately, given the timing, those would probably have to be presented back to APA as individuals, as opposed to forwarding something to the board and asking for the board's support for public comment. So
I think one of the things that, if this does get adopted, that we need to consider, I think it was in that email, is that if this is adopted, when this was originally created, the behavior analysis was listed for doctorate level psychologists who are going to have some type of behavior analytic training, not necessarily master's level clinicians who maybe wouldn't. And so I think that if APA does adopt this particular one, because that's what they're talking about doing and what they're asking for comment on, that's my concern, is that then it's going to change our licensing as well. Like Kansas's, not necessarily behavior analysts, but Kansas.
Can you refer us to the page number, Allison?
Yes, hold on. Well, if you just go to the APA one, it has it at the top that it says like this is the the APA info understanding one that he sent. It's on what's being updated in 2025. It's at the top, it's in the middle of page 1. So it's saying that master's levels will be included in this.
And in the other one, where does it say that doctorate level
When we did it in 2010, like when they created the first one, doctorate level had behavior and analysis listed in it. I don't know if it's in the first one. That's my concern. Or my presentation of this document.
Let me see if I can find behavior analysis. It is
I do think it's worth noting
page 4, top of page 4.
That I've run into, sorry guys, it's like closing time, and so you're gonna hear a lot of tiny humans out there. I got my door closed. I'm so sorry. I do think it's worth noting that I've been fighting with specific insurance companies as like a private business around them not disclosing like histories, because they're like, well, a psychologist is the peer. Not necessarily. Not if they don't have training. And I've been pushing back on this like pretty aggressively.
Yeah.
And I think that
I have too.
This is scary for me, because if they start to include that, then they're going to start including master's level psychologists as well, who are also still not my peer when we're doing peer reviews. And so that's where I get a little nervous.
So it starts at the bottom of page 3 and top of page 4 is where the first instance of behavior analysis comes in.
And I think connecting this goes to the definition of provisional licensed practitioners of psychology. That's on page 3, line 118. It says that term refers to psychology professionals who have earned master's degree in a field within health services psychology and are providing psychological services under supervision during their completion of post-degree requirements for licensure. So there's the topic of, master's level psychologist. So I don't know that it's defined quite that cleanly in the document, but I think that's part of this conversation. So when you're looking at the term behavior analysis, you kind of have to connect who's able to provide that with that new definition of provisional licensed practitioners of psychology.
And it's important because in our bill, it says that they're excluded from having to be licensed as a behavior analyst.
But still permitted to practice behavior analysis.
Right.
That's the thing.
But that was the PhD level, right?
Yeah, plus the autism specialist.
Yeah.
But at least an autism specialist has K-CART training.
Right.
And I do think it is definitely worth it for all of you to review that draft. And like we said, it's open out for public comment through March 3rd. Because of the timing issue, if you want to provide comment back before that closes, you'll probably have to do that as individuals. If you do want to submit a recommendation to the board, something the board could consider, but the board would have to consider that after the time period closes. So.
All right.
The time
Thank
period
you.
has been longer.
Thank you,
I think it's
Allison.
particularly relevant for this board to make a recommendation, or this advisory group to make a recommendation to the board, but I recognize that we're not going to be able to do that. It's also just important to me that people are seeing these.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's good to be informed, and just for clarity too, if something does get put into the Model Practice Act for APA, that does not mean that the BSRB has to follow it. There would still need to be a change to adopt anything from one of these practice acts. So definitely important for us to be aware of this and be part of the conversation. But if you're curious if adding this to their act would impose it upon Kansas or our state, there'd have to be a lot more steps for something like that to occur. So.
And good things for people to know. Again, why you should be doing a training on all of it.
Yes.
There have been things added to other practice acts that we have disagreed with, but ultimately because they're not binding on us, we can make those arguments, but we don't fight too strongly on some of those things, just because we have our sovereignty as a state to make those choices too. So.
All right. So our next meeting is not on Friday the 13th. It's on Friday the 10th in April. So your marching orders are to look at the supervision. Think about adding supervision of unlicensed staff in somewhere and adhering to specific guidelines. It's to review these two articles that were provided by Allison and think about how it impacts it, and do your right as U.S. citizens that we still have to make public comment on the potential model act that is being put forth, and how while behavior analysis has historically been included under what is it? Somebody's got to know the APA. Ed Morris would know it. The section 54 or whatever it is was under APA was behavior analysis, that we are now considered a distinct and separate field. So how do you think that Model Practice Act impacts that? And make your voice heard. Right?
Freedom of speech.
Freedom of speech.
Yes. Do you need a motion to close this? To be done? It is 3 on the button.
Yeah. I'll take a motion.
Got it. Motion to see you next time.
I need a second. Nikki, all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Hey, motion carries. You guys are all free.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank
Bye.
you.